Hey everyone, welcome to this session. This session is Growing the Rainbow, LGBTQ plus perspectives in Landwork. And this session is hosted by the Justice Strand that's part of the RFC, previously known as the Justice Hub. And it's hosted collaboratively between Solidarity across land trades, shared assets and seeding reparations. The Justice Strand invites those from marginalised perspectives to connect, share knowledge and empower each other. The sessions centre on equity, solidarity and collaboration and are held across multiple spaces in the Story Museum and in the Town Hall, which is this building. Some of the topics that we're covering are difficult, so please practice the ethos of justice in this space and be considerate of others. If you need to access wellbeing support, please let one of our volunteers know. And yeah, I'll let the panel introduce themselves and crack on with the session. Thank you so much.
Is the mic on? It is. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And just as an added reminder for everyone here in the room, and of course, people joining us online, to please respect pronouns, and where you are uncertain, revert to gender neutral out of respect. That would be really great. And yeah, just as a reminder, this is a respectful and inclusive space. So to just honor, respect, diversity and inclusion, and not make assumptions, and being open and celebratory. So I'd like to introduce, before I introduce our amazing speakers, I wanted to say a few words, introduce myself, and say a few words for kind of how this came about, if that's okay, because I'm really, really excited that ORFC has created this space for today's discussion. So my name is Vera Zakharov. I am the local action coordinator at the food and farming charity Sustain. I focus on everything from amazing work happening on the ground through to how we can combine our movement for policy change at the national level. I started kind of collecting perspectives and stories from the food partnerships across the UK, as well as food and growing projects where people are creating spaces for LGBTQ plus communities to come together over food. And what struck me is that while we've been getting better at, as a food and farming movement, to talk about a breadth of issues around diversity and inclusion, that not many people were talking about LGBTQ plus identities. And I found that a little bit strange. I mean, as a queer person also, I felt a little bit sad that a part of my identity wasn't being reflected. And I think in those conversations, what became really clear is that there's a real danger if we don't speak about this, because I think as many as our speakers are going to be talking about, LGBTQ plus communities face a number of risks and dangers, and actually lose out a lot by kind of being effectively told that they sort of don't belong. And part of talking about and creating a sense of visibility is reiterating not just belonging, but creating a sense of commitment to ensuring people, actively ensuring that people are welcome. So that's why a few of us were kind of chatting about the need for a panel like this last year. And I'm so grateful that it's come to fruition. We are going to hear from 5 amazing speakers, and I'm also really excited that we are too big for this tiny table. With us today, we have Taherzadeh and Mohamed from Teasel Coop, based in Cardiff. We have Anna Barrett from Landworkers Alliance Out on the Land Collective, who will also be speaking about their work on a project called Cultivating Justice. We also have Ben Andrews, who is a farmer not too far from here, and also is one of the founding members of the project Agrespect. And last but certainly not least, we have Shane Holland, who is part of, so you're the lead for Slow Food UK, the chairperson, and also is part of the Slow Food LGBTQ2S plus collective. We're going to be hearing about some of their work at the Taherzadeh conference that just happened this past year. So without further ado, I'll pass on this mic.
Is this on? Yes, great. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start by giving a bit of an intro to Teasel Coop. So we started meeting as a group of kind of friends and people connected in the queer community in Cardiff a couple of years ago, or like 2 years ago, and spent a whole year just having conversations with each other and really wanting to solely vision together before we started doing anything like out in the community. And that kind of visioning came around, or like was happening around this idea of a long-term plan of having a queer-run worker co-op farm that functions, is like deeply connected to the local urban community, queer community in Cardiff. So we were thinking about somewhere kind of in the outskirts of Cardiff or accessible from Cardiff, because really we felt very kind of disconnected as queer people in the city from land, but really wanted to find a way, and knew that that was the case with our wider community, and in envisioning a queer farm, we wanted to feel like we were bringing people with us, and it wasn't just a small group of us going off and doing that whole queer commune thing. Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to try and quickly whiz through some slides. Like broadly, we have 3 activities or aims that we're working on at the moment as we I mean general, but as we build up to this idea of a queer farm near Cardiff. So that's like political education, nature and land connection, and building up land-based skills. And like connecting with the land, like taking queer folks, particularly from the city, out into, even if it's like urban green spaces, is really critical, because for a lot of people they feel incredibly disconnected. And here's another picture from, so the first one was a bird communing workshop. This is our residential that we did at Bright Goch in Mohamed, and we just went on a walk out in the mountains, and it was really beautiful.
Great. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as a part of this residential, we took a group of queer people to Mohamed for a couple of days, like a long weekend. And our whole kind of idea with the residential, which is a thing that we want to continue doing, was to reduce the barriers of queer people spending time in nature, but also pair that with learning land-based skills and learning about land-based movements and agroecology, and having that kind of facilitated discussion and learning while also doing kind of nature-based activities and connection.
And here's a picture from our mushroom walk, where we're talking a lot about queer ecology. So it really like brings one of those strengths from bringing a queer perspective to the land movement. And we brought in someone from outside of the co-op who's an amazing kind of like queer ecology educator facilitator. And then another workshop on seed sowing, just getting some like practical introducing people to things.
Great. And also kind of a thing that we realized in our first ever offering that we did that was like for the community, which was a spring equinox event and kind of celebration, was that queer people in Cardiff really wanted a way to come together around seasonal moments and celebrate the passing of the seasons and bring in ritual and reverence of the land and other species. So that's been a thing that we want to kind of continue doing, to bring in a wider thought of community that isn't just queer people. It's also being in community with the land and with other species.
And oh yes, that was that. And then this is our autumn equinox celebration. Just highlighting the importance of seasonal celebrations and bringing people together around food. And then, our final one, just, a picture of our residential, like, not just doing things in nature, but also doing the political education side of things, like introducing people to some of these concepts, making people aware of the movement that they could feel a part of, but at the moment don't know how to navigate and feel on the margins of, and doing some visioning together as well.
Yeah, just I guess a final point to say that the queer community that we're working with are a mixture of people who have like thought about wanting to do land-based things but have no no pathways to that currently, but also just queer people who don't want to kind of commit to maybe this movement in a work capacity, but want to build in relationship with land into their lives. So yeah, it's a mixture of kind of holding those two groups of people. Yeah, great.
Hi, my name's Anna. Thanks for having us in this room. It's really nice to be part of this panel as well. Pretty excited to get into some chat in a bit. But yeah, just give you a little bit about myself and then who I'm here to represent really today. So yeah, I'm a market gardener. I run a market garden for Wilson's restaurant, Wilson's Michelin star restaurant in Bristol, and then as a volunteer, I am a member of Landworkers Alliance and a volunteer member organiser for Out on the Land, which is, I'll probably just refer to it as UTOR because it's quite a mouthful. There's so many mouthfuls, probably generally anyway. But yeah, I've been involved with UTOR since, for about 5 years or so now it's existed. But yeah, it is probably quite important to note that it's purely volunteers, so it's people who are all land workers themselves, so I guess slightly differently to the people that you guys work with, the people who do have access to land, and then are kind of organising for the LGBTQ plus community, extra to the work that they do on the land. Yeah, so let me see. So yeah, this is our statement here. It's essentially what we aim to do. So yeah, there is an element of building solidarity, an element of connecting people potentially who are in reasonably, they may be in a reasonably isolated situation and don't have connection to similar folk. So there's a digital sort of strand of that, and then there's an in-person kind of strand of that. So just got a few pictures, but yeah. So this is a farm tour that we did to one of our members' farms that she was head farmer of at the time. So that's just a picture of some of us there. Again, I think one of the things with UTOR is that people have quite different capacities throughout the 5 years that I've been there. There's been a lot of different folk have more or less involvement in the organising. So it's really nice when we have things like a farm tour where you get to meet people who haven't necessarily been involved in any of the organising, but are able to come along to a social and meet new people, and also, go on a farm tour and see what someone else is doing. So it's a really important part of what we do. This is some food being cooked at Folks Farm on a farm tour there. And then we do things like a summer social. We didn't do one this year, but last year we did one, which was, again, just another opportunity for people to come together, sort of celebrate, and meet new people, share stories, which I think is just such an important thing when you're all quite far apart. And then I'm going to speak briefly about the Cultivating Justice collaborative project, which was a collaboration which had a series of outputs, but the collaboration was between Out on the Land, Land in Our Names, and Farmerama. So it was a three-way collaboration which resulted in a series of outputs. So we made a really wonderful, all the outputs are wonderful, but I've never been involved in a podcast before, so we made a podcast series which you can find on Farmerama's website. It's really amazing, really great to hear people's voices telling you their stories, I think, in your ear when you're working up wherever you work or, doing something related to that it's really, really powerful. And then we had we have 3 different publications, all of which are quite different, which I believe we've got at least 2 of them for sale at the back of the room. So there was a transplant scene, and then there's a Gourds, Banjos and Callaloo zine, and then there is Landworkers, more photographic publication. And they were all kind of led by different members within the three kind of groups that were participating in the Cultivating Justice project. So they all have a quite different flavour, and I think it's really part of one of the strengths of that project was the diversity of the outputs and inputs. So yeah, it was really great to do that. And then, not to take up too much more space, that's a good one, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, but that's, I think, everything I have to say for now. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, my name's Ben Andrews. I'm an organic farmer from Herefordshire. We farm from Herefordshire, but most of our farm's actually owned by one of the Oxford University colleges. It's a bit random, but we've been organic for the last 20 odd years, but very much in quite an isolated sort of way that a lot of farmers on quite a large scale are, so with very little connection to people outside our little silo. And so it was one of the reasons that a friend of mine, Matt Naylor, and I, and a couple of others, has founded Agrespect. So it's nowhere near as organised as what Anna's doing with Out on the Land. It's all a little bit disorganized, but we basically, Matt gave me a call. He'd just seen a feature on Country File about gay farmers being the high rates of depression and suicide, and we felt that, you know, everybody knows that there's serious mental health issues within farming, but we wanted to try to portray a slightly more positive view of it, because we were both felt in a pretty good place, and we wanted to show that you know it's not a choice between being a farmer and being like closeted gay and unhappy, and the alternative being I need to run away to a big city to live my authentic life. So we got in touch with a couple of people we knew. Got a website set up, and then started posting some stories, some case studies of people who wanted to get in touch with us to say about how they're living, the sort of farming they're involved with, and we were absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of initial response we got to it. And we've got farmers from Scotland with thousands of acres down to small beef farmers down in Cornwall, and everybody in between, and not just farmers, sort of accountants that just deal with farmers, vets, sort of agricultural lawyers, sort of animal feed merchants, just pretty much all the bits that just aren't just farmers. And so we also then went out to some of the larger industry bodies to say, will you sign a pledge that basically says that you will, just be anti-discriminatory. It's not a big ask, is it? But it's just like, but yeah, and again, all those big names like Farmers Weekly and NFU and all those were actually really really supportive, which was great. And we've done a few socials as well. So we went to the first Pride March we did was down in Brighton, and Massey Ferguson lent us a big old tractor for the day, and we had it branded up in rainbow vinyl and called it Sassy Ferguson, which absolutely like stole the show. And when you've been you spent like the first like 20 odd years of your life sort of like with this sort of self-loathing inside, and then you're in a space with like 500,000 people just all on your side. You're just like, oh wow, yeah, this is all right. This is all right. And so we've done a couple of other prides, hoping to do Bristol this year. You in Bristol? See you there. And it's been great to actually sort of connect with people because we have sort of growing up in a small rural community where you think you're the only person like you in the world, to now sort of have this sort of almost infinite connection to other people who've had a similar sort of history is really quite liberating and really quite soul nourishing. And so seeing and we're not all on the same page in terms of how we farm, should I say. I think there's probably a lot of people. I've had some heated discussions with some pig farmers, but it's we're all sort of have the one thing in common, and that is we're LGBTQ plus people working in the agriculture industry, and that's fantastic. But yeah, where we sort of take it from here, we've sort of got into quite a like I said, we don't have a committee. It's not a formal charity or anything like that, and we're all like farming all over the place. And so being able to actually so if anybody wants to come and get involved and start organising events, that'd be great. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got to say about Agrespect. Hoping for a bit of a conversation later.
Fantastic. It's always such a privilege to be here. But I also have that kind of imposter syndrome because I'm not a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer, and I grew up down in Cornwall, so I did come into that very, very rural area. And I'm of the age, actually, right in the heart of both BSC and also, dare I say, the AIDS crisis, where we all did run away. And perhaps that resonates with some of us in the room. Some people are nodding there. So maybe I would have been a farmer if it had been a different era. I'm Shane Holland, and I chair the Slow Food movement here in the UK. I think all of you will have heard of Slow Food, but many people sometimes don't realise just how large we are. We're actually the largest non-UN NGO in the world, so we have offices in 150 countries. And we also operate this really, really zany event, which is so large we can only run it every 2 years, and that's called Terra Madre Saloni de Gusto. And I know some of you, because I recognise some of you, have been to that. 1.5 million people go to that. And it's something which is just incredibly special. It's a bit like Oxford Real Farming Conference combined with the largest farmers market, combined with so many other things. So we have about 2,500 conferences over 5 days. We bring more than 5,000 delegates ourselves as an organisation from those 150 countries. And we always say that slow food is queer food, and we created our LGBTQIAS2S+ group. Because what we thought is that, we stand for quality food. We stand for what we call good, clean and fair. That's the kind of food that all of us in the room here would be advocating for, what we're growing, what we want to produce, what we want to purchase. And we speak about that. But we were also really aware that we do that in a global way, and actually many people in the globe don't have a voice. I have enormous privilege. I know that. I have privilege that I don't even know that I have. But what I can do and what we can do as an organisation is give voice. So we think about some of those countries that we operate in, that we work in, that we do that work in, and we are very, very grassroots. And it's really important for me to say that I'm not telling someone in the Global South what they should and shouldn't be doing. That's done in a local office there. But actually they don't always have the opportunity to have that voice. There are countries that I've visited this year on behalf of the organisation whereby my social media accounts are always permanently closed, and I have to do that because actually those governments are issuing visas and will have a look at my social media, whereby getting off the plane would mean that I could be arrested. Now that's a problem for me, but again, as a white male from the UK with a British passport, they'll probably just send me home again. If we're talking about the people living in those countries, they'd be in prison. There are countries that we're working in where to actually be considered to be actually sexually active will probably get them executed. So we created this forum. There is a reason why there isn't too very many exciting slides there of the work we do. Vera wrote to me and said, can I have some slides? And I said, well, not really, Vera. I said, because we don't really have them. So when we have our meetings, we always have a rule, please no photographs, and it's not because I'm not particularly photogenic. It's fine to take pictures of me, but actually, for some of those people that will be interacting, some of the people who are coming to our meetings, that can literally be a death sentence. Or they just simply won't feel comfortable about coming. So what kind of topics do we speak about? Well, all the kind of topics that we're speaking about here, but then some. what is it that you may need to think about if actually succession really relies on children? What does it mean if there's very, very defined parameters about what farming means, what selling of food means? What if that's very gender-based on either gender? How can we support that? How can we look at that? And that's what Slow Food tries to do. It tries to give voice, it tries to give empowerment, it tries to use the privilege that we have here to actually give voice and support and allow those voices to come through. So as I say, Slow Food is queer food, because what we stand for, what you all stand for, is good, clean and fair food. Now I know that this particular conference is being streamed, and I'll say to anyone who's potentially watching online, maybe from those countries, maybe watching and is particularly finding it very difficult in their lives, I stand with you. We all stand with you. And that's why I'm so excited that we have this session here today.
Thank you so much. And this one does, okay, there it is. I feel like one side is silent. Thank you so much, and that's a really beautiful point to end on in the intros. Thank you so much, Shane. So I think there's for me, it feels like there's a wealth of synergies between your projects. A number of you had mentioned the importance of celebration and ritual and actually connecting with people in person. There's so many themes of isolation and disconnect in a number of ways, but I think there's this really important point around the risk of the in-person and actually the deep value, safety and importance of spaces where people can be present, can interact and can learn in a way that doesn't put themselves as risk. So I think the notion of privilege as a responsibility within these movements is really interesting. I wanted to kind of pose a few questions to hear a bit more from you guys about your projects, but very soon we'd like to bring it more to a kind of discursive Q&A. So if that's okay, I just wanted to ask of potentially of all of you, if you can add just like a minute or so. So why are affinity groups really so vital within the LGBTQ plus land and food space? I mean, you guys have spoken about already some of the challenges and barriers, both nationally and globally, but what is the kind of, I suppose, what's the real, like, the number one value for you of that kind of space of that mutual support? And I think you guys have started talking about that, but that kind of the community of care. Would you guys like to, whoever would like to start, to say a couple of words on that?
I think for us there was with Agrespect there was two reasons for why we felt it was important. There's one because there's a skills shortage in agriculture, and we felt that we needed as many new, exciting, interesting minds, diverse minds to come into agriculture. And if people from outside it are seeing it as being racist, misogynist, homophobic, transphobic, etc., then why would they want to be involved in that? And also then for the people who are already in it, the kids like me from way back, I think every human desires just to feel like they belong somewhere, sort of that sense of belonging, and when you sort of like grow up sort of feeling a bit othered, then you don't feel like you've got your tribe, or sort of people that you can really connect with. So I think it's to just be able to, the thought of having that, like when we were all kids, and if there are kids now being able to see that, trying to be that sort of role model or sort of organisation that you kind of wish had been there when you were younger. But I think and for us as well, just in terms of growing food, we are everybody out there is a consumer of British produce. If we've got farmers, if we've got all the farmers buy British, go out and buy British, it's like, why? Why should people go out and buy British if they think the industry is homophobic, or if they think it's transphobic or misogynist? Give them a reason to want to buy British. So yeah, that's kind of like several different.
Great. I think also one of the main things that I think of when I think of this question is the diversity within the queer community, and how the groups of people that come to our events and our residentials really have such a varied experience of farming and agriculture. And we've got people who are have grown up in rural farming communities and then moved to the city to find more queer community. And we also have queer people who've grown up in the city and have a real sense of disconnection to the land. And bringing these groups of people together is really, I think, enriching, because what you have happen is lots of peer learning and sharing and bridging of experiences that feels very community-led, and not just us coming to our community and being like, we know what it means to connect to the land, we'll show you. Getting people to understand that they have a lot of that in themselves, and also the understanding that comes with already going to new experiences, and as with your community that you already have relationships with and have a sense of safety with.
Yeah, and I think, as you were saying before, trying to challenge the idea of queerness being associated with the urban, but something that someone from Lion was talking about in one of the previous workshops is instead of just going, then go get involved in land work, go get involved in this field, without being aware of actually all the barriers and the things that people are going to face. And so how can we support people to go and be in rural spaces, go and connect with land-based skills, connect with the kind of organizations and movement spaces that would be involved in this, and feel safe, feel like they're not going to be on the margins, that they're not going to be made to feel excluded, and that it's not going to be traumatic. Because I think for a lot of people in our community, there is a fear not only of rural spaces, but also of connecting with nature for a bunch of different reasons, and particularly around that intersectionality with race. We have, some people who have zero connection to the land. They really want to seek that, but they don't know how to start. And then there are some people who have that cultural connection, from a different culture, but they're cut off from that because of their queer identity, and that brings up a lot of pain for people. And so the act of being in nature, connecting with the land, doing these practices, can be really emotional and traumatic for people. It can be a vulnerable space, especially where people are also struggling with mental health issues. And so knowing that they can do that in a safe environment that celebrates their identity, and where other people will understand their experience is really important. And the only other point I wanted to say was how important it also is bringing the kind of queer perspective to all of this work, and how motivating it is to be part of a space where that is celebrated and that's explored. What are the things that we can bring around challenging binary thinking, queering things, a queer ecology perspective, and really seeing that as a strength, and building on the existing communities of care that we have, to bring people into this kind of work.
Thank you so much. Go for it. Yeah, no, go for it. Yeah, I was going to...
Yeah, I was going to say, I think food is really, really fascinating, and by extension farming is really fascinating, because food for me is about love, and it's about a sense of place. And I think so many of us are looking for that. And that may be because we're really proud of being in the community that we are, wherever that community is. And we celebrate all that's good there. And how do we celebrate? Well, we celebrate with food, don't we? I mean, it's that truism. If you say the word cake, everyone smiles at you, because, we think about being with our grandmothers or our grandfathers in that very happy place when we're in childhood, or many of us would. But actually, there's a long history of food being something which is so core to us that we take it with us. Whether it's the horrors of what happened in colonial times, a moving of people, and people would take seeds and things and hide them in their hair, or we think about First Nations people as they would move from the land, they would take things that would have traditionally grown along with them, to places of today. Some of us will have moved from a particular community. Maybe we've also moved back. But actually what we will have always taken in our hearts is the food, the culture, or that sense of safety. Or as I say, we feel particularly proud of being somewhere we are. That is who we are and what we are, or we take on the best of something else. So I think food and, as I say, by its very extension, by growing and farming, is far more than just calories. I think we often can distill food into something of, it's fat and it's protein and it's going to make us fat, or it's not going to make us fat, or, we do something else. It's far more than that. It's about love, it's about belonging, it's about a sense of place, it's maybe how we show love, maybe it's how we receive love, it's about where we are, and it's that C word, it's about community.
I think just a final thought, we've covered most of it, but I think there's the importance of centering ourselves in the farming and broader food sort of movement is just the pure joy that you get to have when you feel like you're in a place that you want to be and you're being held by that place and respected in that place. And I think it's something that everyone deserves. So I think that's really important to center ourselves in that. And I think then on the very other end of the spectrum, it's sort of ensuring that policies are reflecting and supporting people in the LGBTQ arena, I don't know, people LGBTQ people, just to make sure it's equitable and everyone's being represented on a policy level as well. So I think, those are the two extremes I can see. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. So I'm going to kind of bring this back to you guys. And I'm working at Sustain, I'm always thinking about what's the kind of policy context that allows us to thrive. But I know through some of the conversations that some of you guys have been thinking about policy and the sort of the functional elements of inclusion. And this is just open to anybody who has something to share. Within your project, what have been some of your experiences trying to change the policies of the spaces you operate in to make them more inclusive for LGBTQ plus people? Would anybody like to start? Where are you feeling perhaps those frictions or limitations or indeed kind of exclusionary practices or language? Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, I guess I could just continue on a little bit that something that we out in the land has set up this year. Haven't actually started the program yet, but we're having a sort of traineeship. It's a supported traineeship with one of our member organisers in the working Woodlands Cornwall. So they're having going to have a traineeship there, which is essentially, I guess, it's not dealing with an external. It's like taking it into our own hands to make sure that we are like hosting and in control of a positive experience for someone in the sector, because sometimes I think it's just quite difficult to access, isn't it? In a way that you're going to be supported.
In terms of policy, probably again the only things that we've done through Agrespect is the sort of engaging with various organisations to get the sort of like the Agrespect pledge sort of put into their constitutions, sort of going to DEFRA HQ and getting signed by Secretary of State, as was at the time Michael Gove. So that's a joy. But yeah, I think it's sort of in terms of policy, you kind of hope that something like the basic human rights stuff kind of covers a lot of it. But there's always going to be someone that is going to be sort of like falling, going to be flouting the rules somewhere. But in terms of our sort of side from being, most of the people that have contacted us from Agrespect they tend to be farmers in their own right, and I think it's sort of like more protections for the people who are like going in to work for somebody else. I mean, we're in a privileged position where we've got we're like just out there doing our thing, but we're kind of our own bosses. We don't have the same level of discrimination that say an employee might face.
So we are a political organisation, so you'd expect us to be heavily involved, and we are. Actually, much of the work that we do is actually around empowering women and women's rights rather than LGBTQI2S plus rights. Globally, and again, you'll all be aware in the room, globally farmers are not old white men. They're young women. And they don't have a voice. They actually do all the farming, but yet they don't receive the benefit from that farming. So the kind of work that we do is working with the UNFAO, and globally we're partnered with the UNFAO to try and ensure that subsidy and other support that's given by the United Nations agencies, but also by national governments, by countries in the global north who may be giving aid, and I loathe the word aid because that kind of gives an impression that actually somehow these countries are beholden to someone else, but let's use the word aid because that's the one that's usually used, to try and ensure that there's equity on gender. Because if we have equity in gender, and I know the great irony of an old white man sitting on a panel talking about this, but if we have equity in gender, then those other things frequently, though not always, come along with it. Now that sounds a bit of a cop-out, but again, for many of the countries that we're working in, it is very, very difficult to have those conversations. In fact, what we can sometimes do is actually very much endanger the very communities we're trying to support. So if we can ensure that there is equity throughout the entirety of the system without actually sometimes mentioning that word, or some of those words, then one could argue at a level, does it matter? Of course, I have great privilege because I can make that choice here. I can say, actually, it does matter here, and therefore, why on earth should it not matter to someone else? But it's about having that step plan to get to where we wish to be, rather than saying all or nothing, because there are people, including in the UK, who are having a pretty terrible time, a pretty horrid time. So that's the kind of way that we're working in. We're actually saying, first of all, we want equity for all, and once we've got that, we can then really start delving much more deeply into what that really could mean.
Thank you. So before, I think actually let's bring it out to a Q&A. There was a couple of other things I wanted to pick out, but actually they might come out in sort of a discursive space, if that's all right. We will take a couple of questions. We could do, I think we have enough time for one question at a time. So we'll take a couple of rounds of questions from the audience here in the room, and then we'll check in online as well and make sure that we give space on both ends. So the first hand I see is the person in the blue jumper.
Hi, thank you for that panel. I just have a question that I'm myself currently very much dealing with, which is that I live in Devon in a small rural town called Totnes, which is amazing and very open-minded and very creative. And there's a big queer community, but it's a AFAB queer community. It's an assigned female at birth community, which I also feel very much in these spaces. And I'm curious, my question is a bit like, where are all the gays? And so what's the difference there? And how can that be differently balanced? Can the gays come down to the countryside and live there? Does that feel comfortable to them? Or how does that, what are your ideas about this, basically? Thanks.
So just to repeat the question for the live stream, is I guess an experience within an open-minded, a small town, but kind of an open-minded space where the queer, and I guess you describe queer landworker community is perhaps more representative, like assigned female at birth, and you're not perhaps seeing representation or reflection from those who are assigned male at birth. Do any of you guys want to come in? And I don't want to put you on the spot, Ben. If you'd like to come in, where have all the gay farmers gone?
I think that is very. I think it is quite apparent. You know, the people you tend to have. They're not like the gay male farmers tend not to be in smaller communities. They tend to be the people on their own in a tractor somewhere dotted around the country. They haven't really. I don't know whether it's down to the sense of not feeling like they can move away, or they feel so. And the thing is, there's that privilege of being a farmer who's got a farm to farm. There is, I guess, not as much incentive to move away to find a community, and then with the infinite connection online, you can chat to people all over the country, but it's not the same as having that in-person connection with other people. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many people do start sort of like popping up as you sort of like start chatting and meeting people. And in Herefordshire, I've actually got there's two guys, a couple who live in a bus on my farm and help pick vegetables, and they're great, and it's really nice actually having them on the farm. And I'd never really considered it before, and I always wanted to keep I'd be out picking vegetables, and that was all I would do, and I wouldn't talk about like personal life or anything with anybody else that was helping me pick vegetables, and I thought that was fine. But actually having them there and to just be a little bit more relaxed and open around them, it just it was something that I never really knew I needed, but it's sort of an accidental thing that's just sort of like happened. But yeah, that's it. I'm not. I mean, I'm guessing most of them are in this. A lot of them are in this room now. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the actual mix in here is. But yeah, I understand you. Yeah, she's.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that question, because I think it's something that I often think about in queer communities, especially in the city. There is a division. It is where are all the gays, and I guess that's something around how patriarchy operates, in both both aspects of privilege, but also really how people people might be isolated or might find it harder to make that community. And a lot of especially when they encounter queer community and queer spaces, they are largely or almost an assumption of women and non-binary spaces that is women and AFAB non-binary, and so I think the LGBT community isn't cohesive whole, and often, especially in cities, you have many different parts of it, and historically how different elements have developed as well, and I think there are opportunities for us to all come together and strengthening from that. And there's also value of having spaces that really speak to those different identities as well, where people can group together.
Thank you. Great first question. So we'll go on to another question in the room.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to kind of bounce off of that question, because I think it's really meaty and really important, and I've got quite a complex question to ask, so I'm going to try and keep it as concise as possible. I guess it's a wider question for me, because I'm kind of considering that fragmentation of the queer community, and also that, there's like you mentioned, there's multiple factors that mean that there is that fragmentation. I think that my major concern at the moment is that we're entering into a socio-political kind of context that really actually relies on us to not be fragmented if we're going to create any kind of meaningful resilience and community care, because, at least from my perspective, on a sort of mainstream level with the current systems that are in place, I don't really think that we're going to achieve any viable policy change within the next 5 to 10 years, because I think we're kind of moving towards quite a stark reality. That's just my belief. But I think that regardless, I'm sort of wondering, how do we create those networks of connection? Because I'm asking from a context of someone that's lived in really rural off-grid communities and is currently living in a really urban community, and I just can't. I'm often asking myself, how do we create these networks and links between people in different spaces, people with different lived experiences, different concepts of queerness, and also how do we kind of how do we move through the identity politics that separates us in terms of where we hold kind of where our inclusivity can move into concepts of division, which is obviously like quite a complex. That's a whole question in itself. But I guess I'm trying to pull threads in to ask that question. Like basically, what on earth are we going to do about all that? How do we create those networks? How do we create those webs? And how do we move through those systemic barriers in a way that doesn't rely on top-down political structure change? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think if I can summate, there's perhaps a little bit of a reflection of the wider societal issue of fragmentation of communities and the sort of the impact and toxic influence of identity politics, but the way that the kind of the toxification, I guess, of certain narratives. And perhaps are you guys seeing that reflected in the LGBTQ plus food and land work, or are you seeing kind of like an alternative, perhaps, could this be the space where an alternative approach that takes away some of those imposed divisions? Could they start from these spaces? And maybe are you guys feeling a connection perhaps between, is this kind of, have you been connecting with other LGBTQ plus land work and food groups? That was not a summation, I apologize. Can you reflect on fragmentation? What next? How do we sort this? Are you guys the solution? Are we the solution?
Can I take that? Is this one on? No, it is, yes. Yes, I think is the answer to what you're saying there. But I think actually I've got a lot of hope actually. I think for youth, I think actually those barriers are absolutely breaking down, and I think you will find your tribes wherever you wish to find your tribes, and those groups are out there, and there is less and less. I think one of the things, I grew up on the cliff tops of Cornwall, virtually down by Land's End, so 3 miles from the nearest house. Cows were my neighbours. If we think about down there aren't actually that many people at all, and maybe this speaks a little bit to your question. If you're in an area which actually has a very low population, the very fact that even if everyone was absolutely out, there would still be a fairly small number. And again, looking at the room here, particularly with males in the room, you're much younger as a demographic, and that's not an accident. When I was going to university, I literally left the cliff tops of Cornwall, went to university. And I'm sorry, this is a bit grim, but within 6 weeks I was going to funerals, people literally that I knew, and a whole swathe of people, not all of them, thankfully I'm here, but a whole swathe of gay men died. And I don't think it's an accident that actually when we go out into some of these communities that we actually, particularly if we're looking at older queer people, that actually we see older queer women there for that reason. But I actually see tremendous hope actually in young people. I was chair of a school governing body until very recently. And I remember when I was growing up in school that literally you simply did everything you possibly could not to be identified as gay, and you still got beaten up and spat and all the things that came with that. And now those kids are self-policing themselves. In fact, if anyone was to even be remotely homophobic, the kids are jumping on those other kids. So where I'm steering back to that is I see huge hope, because actually I think some of these divisions are dissolving, and we're becoming less marginalised, becoming less sectionalised. And I think we will find our communities and find our tribes wherever we are. And actually maybe for some of us that will be defined by sexuality, because we want to find people that we have things in common with in that way. But for others, maybe you like singing, and maybe you'll just happen to go to a singing group and you'll meet like-minded people there. And I see great hope in that way.
Anna, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think it's something that out on the land we've kind of, we had to deal with reasonably early on, and we had to make, I think there's often there's a lot of different intersections, there's a lot of different personal identity politics that happen, and that's brilliant, and that makes us like a much stronger and more diverse group, and we were all there with, certain aims in mind. But I think we're a trans-inclusive group, and there was something that came up quite early on, which, potentially because we were sort of not really prepared enough as we should have been to kind of deal with that, and it kind of could have completely floored the group and stopped it. But actually, it was too important to all of us to let it happen. So I think then, off the back of that, I think it's why we often seem quite organised from an external point of view, because we've had to make sure that we're protecting everyone and make sure that we're making a safe a space as possible within, within a diversity of people's identities and interests, and trying to keep all of that in there, but definitely making sure we're saying what cannot possibly happen in our name. And I think that was something that just felt like it was so important for us to do together, and to really be clear that we are trans inclusive, and we really want everyone and the allies who are in that corner with us, like let's go and do it. So I think there's what am I trying to say? I guess we're trying to keep it wide, but also making sure we're all on the same page for things which are absolutely non-negotiable. Yeah.
I guess what came to mind for me was the way that we introduce Teasel at all of our events. It's about coming together and figuring out collectively what it means to be a queer person living through a climate crisis, and that is the thing that is why I do the work in Teasel. I think that ultimately in moments of crisis we come together around our needs, and food is a basic need. And so helping people feel empowered to know about where the food is coming from, and to be connected to that and support that being produced in ways that are not just good for us but good for the land, and good for the climate and everything, and everyone who does that work, to feel valued in what they're bringing, and that we would not be able to continue existing without. That's a part of it. And another part of it, I think, is I feel like as a queer person I've learned everything I know about community from being a queer person, and having to rely more on a wider community than family and other things that maybe cis-het people might naturally just continue traditional paths and ways of connecting to people, and relying on smaller relationships, and more fragmented nuclear relationships. So I think there is so much learning that I've done personally in that, and understanding all of those issues, and seeing how we become fragmented. And I think about that a lot in terms of wider values around kind of abolition and transformative justice and other things like that, and bringing all of that into these spaces, I think is another thing that really drives me in doing this work, and helping people move in a direction together.
I really like the question, and it's something I think about a lot, and we'll be I'm going to do a brief pitch. We'll be incorporated into our movement building sessions, workshops tomorrow, thinking about how can we hold both having communities where we really feel at home and connected and can understand each other's experience and feel safe, but not let that mean that we're being divided, isolating ourselves, seeing others as wrong or bad, or that we can't be in those other spaces. And so how do we manage to have both of those things? And there's some sides that say, oh, we need to all unite, so therefore we need to get rid of these kinds of spaces, or stop the kind of increasing diversification of that. But I think it's really important that we hold both, and I like the kind of challenge of when we go back to Cardiff, we can be doing more to go and reach out to those more traditional spaces of LGBT organizing, of gay men, how can we bring together, rather than just relying on those people who automatically connect with the message we're putting out, or the identity of queer. And then the final thing I was going to say, was just that, to not even though there are such, I think it's massive strength of the community to have those relationships of care and connection and things beyond family. It's also important not to romanticize it. There is a lot of division. There is a lot of conflict. And it is tearing apart. Like, as with all political communities, like this kind of divisiveness does make things really difficult, and we have a wider struggle that we need to fight. Yeah.
Thank you. I would love to go to, I'll come back to the room, but I'd like to go to the online space and if there's any questions in there, or, so we're just going to check in. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So there's a question, which ways have you found to be effective in gaining access to land as LGBTQ plus people? I'm just going to tag on another question to that because it's very short. There's someone in Bangor in Wales who wants to know if there's any activities that you run around there as well. But the first question was, which ways have you found to be effective in gaining access to land as LGBTQ plus people?
Would anybody like to go first? Yeah.
For me, it's not a huge issue. Sort of like my family having been farmers for about 600 years, but like tenant farmers. But there is a fear that I had, and a lot of other farmers in a similar position would have had, of worrying that if I come out, I will not be able to stay on this farm, and that has happened to a lot of people, and they have, that I've spoken to, and they have found that they come out and then they're essentially disowned, and the father would rather see the farm get sold off than his gay son carry on generations of like, but I mean it's not really answering the question particularly, but it's a different spin on it.
You're bringing, I think, the sort of from the opposite end, the perspectives, the fear of actually losing access when you have. Would anybody else like to come in?
I guess like one thing I think about this is like the need to create alternative structures for accessing the land, which is always harder than going down the traditional route. I think when I first joined this movement, it felt like the main way to get onto land is you and your straight partner go and join your resources together and go buy a bit of land and go and do it. And just as with like having children, having community, like it's, as a queer person, it is harder to create those new paths of doing things, but can offer such a beautiful new way of doing things that has a lot of strength. So I think like pulling together is as a co-op, as like reimagining what it could be like to access land, maybe perhaps like doing it just out of an urban centre and not living on the land, or like all working part-time, like thinking about the accessibility requirements of that as well. Like how can we involve more people in land work and break out of these traditional routes of like this is what it means to get on the land as well. Oh, and the Bangor thing. Unfortunately, because of like the history of like English colonialism in Wales, like South Wales and North Wales are really badly connected. So it's easier for us to do stuff over the border in England than it is for us to do stuff in North Wales. But we will, at some point in the future, hopefully organise something in North Wales. We're doing something in Pembrokeshire next year. So yeah. Oh, this year. We're now in 2025.
Just also on the Bangor thing. So out on the land, we're currently working really hard on sorting out our online, sort of digital social space. So we're really hoping that quite soon we'll be able to relaunch it with a incredibly with a solely social side to it. So I know it's not quite the same as like an in-person meetup, but that should mean that there'll be different threads for different people, done by region and also done by sector. So you can it's on a Discord channel, so you can choose to opt in to just a small amount of it that would be directly interest to you. So potentially there could be some people in Bangor or around the area which might be able to connect with like that. I think just also speaking about access to land, personally for myself, I mean, I have a lot of privilege in my queerness. I'm really aware of that. So I guess I work for someone. I don't own land myself. I'm an employee, but I would always just strive to promote, because I promote myself and with the privilege that I have to promote like that I am queer and I am working in this space, and just, you know, in the most basic visibility way possible, to kind of try and encourage other people into the industry. But I guess just on a very basic level, just sort of be a friendly face if anyone's got questions or something. Yeah.
Thank you. Be great to take another couple. Lots of questions coming up. So, I will go over there. I think I spotted you first in the pink jumper. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Eating Better. So we're an alliance of nearly 70 organisations now, including Landworkers Alliance, Sustain, Soil Association, loads of them, Slow Food UK. But visibly, we don't have any LGBTQ plus groups, obviously because Out on the Land is part of the overall Landworkers one, and so they're within alliance members but not visible. How important is it for organisations to be visible in that way, and how can alliances like ours make that happen without it coming across tokenistic? And for show, how can we actually include those groups?
Thank you. I think hopefully that would have been heard well enough online and here as well. So yeah.
As a member of Eating Better, ask us. It's very simple, I think. Actually, I think you start that dialogue, and then we see how we can work together and how we can drive that together. But I think the first step, and in fact, in doing anything with anything, is to actually ask the question. And I think it's a really brave question to ask, and it's not necessarily with a necessary defined goal, but you start that dialogue, and you start the dialogue with the other members. And then you create something. And I think what you end up creating is rather special, because actually it's genuine, it comes from the network. And if providing one doesn't come at it with a defined end goal, then you'll create something which is really special. I'd be very happy to bounce emails.
Would you guys like to, I guess I'm perhaps open to anybody else, do you feel like the time is right for a kind of a wider constellating across the UK food and farming movement of organizations that are kind of giving space to this? And I think that's a really important question, because I think there are conversations we haven't kind of held here. On the other end of it, actually, what LGBTQ plus experiences mean in terms of food access, and I think particularly within the context of food insecurity. So I think there are many lenses, and I think you're right that this is bubbling up, but there's not enough constellating. So how are you guys feeling about, do you feel like there needs to be something bigger at perhaps the UK level? If, you know, I think there's a lot happening more at the kind of global level, which the slow food space is really creating. But
I think there are like really good examples from other countries, particularly in Latin America, of like these big coalitions and networks having identity-based organizing operate across them. And I think like while there is definitely a strength to like visibly including organizations with that focus, I think there's a lot that can be brought out of organizing across an alliance in terms of that, and lots of learning between those different organizations and what it means in the different contexts. And I think that's the only thing I want to
add. With Agrespect, you know, we have, I think there's sometimes some like Venn diagrams where there's a little bit of overlap with different organisations. So I think, you know, Agrespect, we've got bits of people. It's essentially just a big WhatsApp group at the moment. But you get people from the Soil Association involved in that, and the Wildlife Trusts and stuff. But then the Wildlife Trust has got its own thing, and RSPB's got its own thing, and Natural England's got its own thing. And then we do some stuff with them, and there's quite often some crossing over. I mean, Soil Association, I'm very surprised Soil Association hasn't got its own group, but then they might, you know, you might have a few people out on the land from soil association. So I guess it's very much down to sort of employees within the various organisations to maybe sort of organise and say, we feel that there is a need for something a bit more formal.
I think also depends what we mean by food as well and food access. I mean, queer people are far more likely to be homeless. Trans people, particularly, are much more likely to be homeless. Queer people are much more likely to be food insecure. So again, because we all come from this rainbow coalition of different areas of food and farming, some of these things will be more pertinent in some of our world than actually in others. So whilst we may all relate and we may all say, actually, this is important, whatever it is we're doing, it will be particularly important for some of us, and there'll be perhaps slightly less emphasis, not saying it's not important, for others. And I think that's perfectly okay and perfectly fine. It's thinking about what is it that I am doing, what's my organisation doing, what do I want to see in my organisation, what does my organisation stand for? And I think, what we all do when we come to Oxford is we all have a common sense of values. We may actually all do very slightly different things, but if we're in this wonderful place, we actually do it with a sense of purpose and a sense of values. And it's thinking about how do those values align with what I want to do, and who are those individuals that I want to encompass, and providing they have agency over that, then I think that's perfectly okay.
Yes, I suppose it sounds like there's a lot bubbling up, but we're kind of like addressing different issues. I think what I find really interesting is where conversations might be happening in isolation, and sometimes it's kind of worth others hearing what is happening. And I think one very immediate example is if the Trussell Trust, for example, is just starting to think with their reporting and the kind of the big surveying of the food banks network that they have, they're starting to think about adding certain questions into their surveys. And other organizations are almost like kind of missing the opportunity to have that light bulb moment, because there isn't a kind of more public conversation happening around it. So I think there is a lot more in terms of cross-pollinating. Certainly my hope is this will be one of many spaces where people can start unpicking it within a particular framing within the food and farming movement. So are there more questions? I know it's so hard. I will. Hopefully you guys will know who really raised their hand earliest. Who's been feeling it? I want to see those fingers in the air. If it's been you in the light brown, I'm feeling it. Okay, you're next.
First of all, thank you so much for creating space for queer people at a farming conference. It's really special. So I'm wondering what, if we're thinking about queer farming futures, queer food futures, what might those look like if we're starting to think about envisaging those? What can we bring to this thought process, and how can we imagine and reimagine those futures for others?
That is a beautiful question. I'm going to start with you guys for sure.
Immediately I think for me, what's important is in hearing that question is the queer and my relationship with that word being a radical one. And so it's about bringing radical views and radical ways of being into farming and into food systems, and the way that looks like for Teasel and what we're envisioning is first of all being very hard on the human supremacy, really thinking about other species and how we can be in solidarity with them and not just each other as people, and bringing our experiences of marginalization and into that sense of solidarity, and to embolden that sense of solidarity with other species. Also, I think it's about, like we said earlier, around kind of different constellations of community and having that be really wide-reaching in all of the different ways that people can show up, and saying show up fully as yourself in all of the ways that you are in these conversations and in these spaces, because that will mean that people keep coming and people keep having this relationship with the land when they feel like they are able to bring their wholeness to that, and all the gifts that come with bringing your wholeness into these conversations. I think about to just think about myself. I'm only a couple generations removed from a like pastoral nomadic community, and culturally that's really like embedded in my culture. My like and coming to the UK like as a migrant, and being able to bring that closeness to that land-based culture here and recontextualize it, because the land here is very different. But like, bringing that with me into these queer lands conversations is really important. And that is also like part of my queerness in this place, is that I'm of a different culture. So just really thinking very broadly about these things, and for me it's such a rich thing to be a queer person and like bring that into this work.
I think just building on that really, for me, like seeing queer as a verb, and like how can we challenge the kind of ways that we think about and do things now to create new beautiful constellations. So, for instance, like when we do our seasonal celebrations, like the very first one we started with Spring Equinox, like really trying to like tackle those things if it's not just so simple as like, I come from this place, and so I should connect with a land-based culture there. Like the world is not simple like this. We come from many places. We feel connected or disconnected from different things for very complex issues, and often for queer people it is more so because of the kind of challenge of connecting with culture and family. And like for me, I'm trying to connect more with my Iranian culture. There is also, which has like lots of seasonal celebrations. There's also the kind of like how that has to partition with my queerness. And so it's like, how can we imagine new ways of having land-based cultures, like that combine different influences, that like really play around with and honor different parts of ourselves, rather than seeing it as that kind of binary as one culture or another, or connected or disconnected. And similarly, like with the urban and the rural, like being in an urban space, like not seeing it as like all of the nature is out there in the rural spaces, but like really challenging that urban-rural binary as well.
I love it. It's the queer theory all over it, just dismantling those binaries. Would anybody else like to add to that? What would you like to see in these a better food future and a kind of queer food future?
Yeah, I guess I'm quite aware that we haven't spoken about allies at all.
Believe me, I'm looking at that clock.
Yeah. And I guess it would be nice to see like empowered allies in us, even within our community. You know, if you have, that, you know, if you want to support your like trans non-binary friends, and you know you're able to, you know, get access to slightly, I don't know, something that they don't have access to, then like making sure you're kind of allying with, like we are allying within our group, but then also, I guess, including like in a queer, if we're talking about queer, like as a concept, then also including like other allies who, you know, can help us kind of work towards, I don't know, like if there's bigger goals that to do with like, I don't know, other justice movements, for example, and kind of we can sort of all ally together to kind of achieve those shared goals, I think. And I think that for me is also a queer approach to things. It's not necessarily thinking just about your gender in the context of your journey in farming or the food movement, but it's also about sort of breaking it out a bit as well.
Just quickly, and I think it's important to remember also that every LGBTQ plus individual maybe has a different sense of how they feel comfortable, where they feel comfortable, and it's about making sure that they're just able to be in the environment that allows them to do that. You know, most people here are kind of, I'm guessing we're all fairly on the same page, the conference, but there are just different people who, and everyone's valid to an extent, but listen, Nigel Farage, but yeah, it's about making sure it is a it's inclusive, and we don't try to impose what our idea of queerness is on everybody else.
I'm going to touch on the allyship because I think that's so important. I think it's also about our own takeaway. And the person in pink from Eating Better earlier was such a great question. What can I do? And I think we all need to ask ourselves that question. And that's how we get out of this conference. Because all of us can do something. All of us can speak to someone else, even if we're doing things within our own world, our own organizations, whatever it is that we're actually doing here. How can we do more? How can we do something else? How can we extend what we're already doing? And how can I help someone else? And I thought it was just such a really wonderful, open and powerful thing to ask. And that, to me, is what coming to Oxford's about. It's about saying, this is where I am, where do I want to be? And actually, in this space, we can then add on, in the queer context, it's not just about food, it's not just about farming, but how can I make that as inclusive as it possibly can be? And I think all of us, no matter what it is that we're doing, can always add and extend that. And I think that's really, really powerful. So I really loved the point about allyship.
And I'd like to come back to say, perhaps maybe starting with Anna, chair's privilege, apologies. We will stick around as much as we can, actually, to continue the chats. But I think, can you touch on a bit more about this, the partnership, the allyship that was created via Cultivating Justice? And I'm just aware from kind of conversations that LGBTQ plus spaces, if you will, queer spaces, there's almost like a more immediate understanding why there needs to be a kind of a focus on beyond just, identity and sexual orientation. There's an understanding of disability, of race and ethnicity, and, kind of racism issues, and even beyond that. Do you mind touching on that, sort of why that is so central to this?
I think there's so much intersection, isn't there, in everybody's lives, and lots of people, will, do identify as LGBTQ+, but they also identify as loads and loads of other things. So I think the Cultivating Justice project was a great opportunity, and not without its challenges, because the different organisations within it are structured in very different ways, and there were a lot of ways that we had to work around that. But I think essentially it was a sort of brilliant project because it kind of allowed us to have these quite varied outputs, which, as I sort of touched on earlier, were quite different styles of things. And I think each of those things probably speak to different people in the room. And I think it gave us as Out on the Land, I think, no matter what you do to try and diversify your membership, your active member organisers, there's always going to be some people that are able to prioritise it and some people who are prioritising other things in their lives or other things in the Landworkers Alliance. Or, we often have this, we need to try it. We're constantly trying to diversify, but it's often, people who are within Landworkers Alliance who are, I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm this, I'm that, but I'm also BIPOC, so I'm actually concentrating on doing that at the moment. And so I think the Cultivating Justice project was just a great chance to sort of see how something could work in a sort of larger, more constellation-y context, I guess, and to also give us a really good window into what the challenges would be for the different organisations in that, and just in terms of structural, mostly just in terms of we're a volunteer organisation and other people weren't. So when do you have a meeting? Sort of that kind of thing. But I think that's probably enough.
I love what you said earlier about you had to do that work, and you did that work early on, and in a way, doing that work at the beginning before problems arise, I think is really. Would anybody else like to touch on that? So to kind of allyship across justice movements. Or you know what? Let's take it to the audience. Absolutely. Yeah. So Dora, if there's anything else online, and actually, why don't we go with you in the blue and then online? Is that okay? Yes.
A comments related. The way I see it is about separation or segregation, because we're all part of something. Depends how we, the social roles or, gender roles, your career path or your life path or different cultures. So if we see us as segregation, we're always part of something, we overlap, we connect with similarities, but we also separate with differences. And then therefore, I think empowerment to me is not actually separated from others as a queer, is actually feeling empowered, being part of something. And I think, and then, and to celebrate the shared joy and difficulties rather than seeing as a challenge. Well, it is challenging, but yeah. But I do have a question. So I want to know your experience about, because there's a talk, people talk about organized scarcity, is especially, for example, policy-related support to agriculture, and also now interaction with, LGBTQ+. What's your experience about your own project being supported by, from the policy aspect in terms of funding, or, I don't know, Thanks. Thank you.
Julie, I'm just open to anybody who wants to start in terms of how you're accessing funding, or...
For us, in terms of getting funding, one of the barriers is to get funding, you either got to be a charity or a CIC or something, and we just haven't done that because we haven't got anybody that wants to take ownership of it, and the all those. It's a lot of admin, isn't it? It's a lot of it's almost like a part-time job in itself. So we've just relied on self-funding to get all our stuff done, asking people for like I said before, getting Massey Ferguson to lend us a tractor for the day. It's only because Matt, who helped set it up, had just bought 2 Massey Fergusons, and then the year he didn't buy a Massey Ferguson, they just didn't have one available to lend us. So, I think the biggest barrier to getting funding is quite often a lot of the paperwork that's involved with registering as a sort of specific body to make you eligible for that funding.
I guess, out on the land, we've been really lucky. We actually accessed funding. This is about our 3rd year of accessing funding. And actually, the first year the funding was specifically for the Cultivating Justice project. And then, so it's from Farming the Future. And then the 2 years after that, then we've had to reapply, but they've really generously funded us again, but with a slightly looser set of outcomes and without needing to be collaborative projects. So that's kind of meant that we've been able to work on our own, outputs that we wanted to have within our organisation, like building our organisation, things like the traineeship, which I talked about earlier, will all be funded by that.
Just shortly, we were really lucky that as we were forming, this programme came along, Sustainable Steps Wales, which is from the National Lottery, focused around hard to reach groups and community groups. Even though what we were trying to do, essentially work towards starting a queer farm, is quite different to what other community groups were doing, like improving insulation or something, we managed to get our funding that allowed us to then launch into the community and start doing stuff.
And maybe, I would hope perhaps that, I know it's an immensely difficult time in terms of funding. I would hope that funders might be really interested in this space and investing in these kinds of spaces and some of these issues. I'm picking that because I think, to me, it feels, at least from a kind of public-facing perspective, you don't see as much of it's not as visible yet, I think, as it should be. I know we're running close to time. It sounded like there was somebody else online. Can I prioritize that? Because my thinking, y'all folks in real life, come find us after.
Thank you. There's one question here, which is, do the panel have any thoughts about addressing the conditions and needs of LGBTQ+ farm workers employed by other farmers or companies? So, a question about kind of employers.
Can I send that over to Ben? And but also out on the land. Also, if you have an LWA take.
I think it's. I was actually having a chat with someone in the pub last night who's a farmer from just next door to me actually, and he was very like he's a absolute top-notch ally in terms of always got my back. He's a good friend of mine, but he's saying, do we still need to have these conversations? Do we and so well, it's quite a privileged position to be saying that from, and as I said before, as a boss of the farm, I don't have to have the same concerns that someone else who's maybe looking for a job on a farm and just worried about. I did a talk for Nottingham University biological sciences a couple of years back, and there was a non-binary vet student who said, I'm going on a vet placement to a farm. I'm terrified of how I'm going to be accepted because I can't pass as cis het. So what am I? What's going to happen? And I don't think there is enough protection because farming is a bit of the Wild West. There's the stuff. There are some really great employers out there, but there are a lot of farms where, I think that people just don't necessarily play by the rules, and I've seen it. And when if you see the comment section of the Farmers Weekly Facebook post, it's a pretty disgusting place to be. I think a lot more needs to be done around it, but I don't know how you go. These farms are such little silos, so cut off from any sort of real regulation in terms of that, and people I think don't feel empowered to be able to speak up about it. So I know that a lot of the larger farms will have much more safeguarding procedures in place. So say the large fruit farms, we've got one massive one next door to us. They will have to have all their welfare stuff absolutely tight as. But the smaller farms where you've got someone who's just coming to drive a tractor for harvest season, I think it's a very different place.
I'm wondering there. I know we're out of time, but I'm wondering there's something learning perhaps about some of the other justice movements, and is there any learning around other experiences of discrimination, especially at that scale? So I wonder if there is a kind of scope to discuss a bit more broadly. Oh my gosh, this has not been enough time, but it's been amazing. I mean, one thing I wanted to say is this evening we're having a social that's hosted by the Landworkers Alliance, and if you guys can spare some time, it'd be great to see you guys there. We could have continued. I think we touched on the gifts that yeah, of course. No. Oh my God, which is beautiful because I was already like, oh my God, how do I choose my poetry or my queerness? Is that
they can all come.
Intersections. Thank you. It's at 8:00. I think
till 9:30.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have to pace ourselves. Thank you so much, guys. I really hope that. My huge thanks to the Teasel Co-op, Out on the Land, Agrespect, Slow Food, Ali, Anna, Ben, and Shane, and huge thanks to all you guys here. If you're not running off, do stick around. I certainly will stick around here for a few minutes, and see you again. See you the rest of these days.
Thanks, Vera.
Thank you.